If someone asks you in Spanish, where do you live? How would you answer? And also, how would you describe that place? Such as, I live in a city, it's hot, and it's very beautiful.
Yes, by the end of today's episode, you're going to be able to describe where you live in Espanol, talking about the weather, el clima, talking about what you think about the city. Is it beautiful? Is it old? Is it special to you? All as a beginner in Espanol. Vamos, Spanglish friends, let's get it started. Welcome to Spanglish Friends, the podcast for true beginner Spanish learners.
Hola amigos, I'm Val, your experienced Spanish teacher and co-host from Venezuela.
And I'm Em, your Australian co-host who's been learning Spanish for 10 years.
We'll help you get confident listening and speaking beginner Spanish with content you can actually use in real-life conversations.
Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on socials at Spanglish_Friends. Let's get started.
Comencemos. Muy buenos días, amigos, and welcome back to our episode 45 of the Spanglish Friends. Bienvenidos a nuestro episodio 45.
Yes, welcome back. And today we've got another super practical beginner's Spanish lesson for you today, talking about describing the place where you live.
This is something very common, and probably you're going to hear it fast in a conversation when introducing yourself or when getting to know new people, such as where do you live? And also having the opportunity to describe that place to people.
We learned in another episode, how do you tell someone else where you live? But today we're really focusing on describing where you live so we can keep conversations flowing in beginner's Spanish.
Exactamente. So in this episode, amigos, we are answering 3 key questions that are going to guide us throughout this lesson.
The first question is a quick reminder of how do you say where do you live in Spanish, such as I live in a city, I live in a town, I live in a suburb, I live in the countryside. The second is how can you then add to that description of where you live, saying about the weather, talking about the weather where you usually live. The third thing we're going to add to that description is then your opinions. What do you feel about your city? Is it beautiful? Is it old? Is it modern? You'll be then able to fully describe where you live in Espanol.
All of these questions are going to play in our mini conversation, en nuestra conversación pequeña que vamos a hacer, that we are going to do, Em and I, where we are going to talk, where do we live? And also describe a little bit about the weather and descriptions about our cities.
That's right. And remember, friends, you don't need to be recognizing every word here. This is just listening for things you recognize and acknowledging, yeah, your Spanish listening skills are improving. So are you ready, Profe Val, for our conversación pequeña?
Estoy lista, amiga. I'm ready. Comencemos. Hola, Em. ¿Dónde vives?
Vivo en una ciudad pequeña.
Ah, ¿y allá qué tiempo hace?
Hace calor y es muy bonito.
Ah, qué bien. Yo vivo en una ciudad grande y moderna.
Okay, amigos, if that felt a bit fast, if it felt a bit confusing, do not press the panic button yet. This is not about understanding everything yet.
Exactamente. And amigos, what you just heard was a real life conversation. It's a conversation that you can simply have with a native speaker. And it was about what is the weather like, where do you live, and also adding a little bit of description to those places.
That's right. It's exactly the kind of Spanish you can use directly after today's episode.
Exactamente. So right now, let's slow down a little bit and start breaking down everything step by step, starting with how a person in Spanish is going to ask you, where do you live? The person is going to use this structure. ¿Dónde vives? ¿Dónde vives? Breaking this question down, ¿dónde means where? And vives is you live, okay? Vives comes from the verb vivir, which means to live.
That's right. And to respond, you'll use the form vivo, which means I live.
Exactamente. Now, into a sentence, you can say vivo en una plus a place. Vivo en, I live in. Una would be a or en. plus a place where you live. Let's see some examples.
Yes. For example, I could say vivo en, I live in una ciudad. Una ciudad. This means I live in a city. I've used una there instead of un because city, the word ciudad in Spanish, is a feminine word.
Now, if you want to describe that you live in a town, town in Spanish means pueblo and it's a masculine word. So you would need to say vivo en un pueblo, a town.
If you want to say you live in a suburb, you could say suburbio. For example, vivo en un suburbio pequeño. I live in a small suburb.
Now, with the countryside, you could say vivo en el campo. I live in the countryside.
Nice. And if you want to add a bit more to that description, you can use the word llamada to say the name of the place where you live. What is it called? For example, vivo en una ciudad llamada Sydney. This means I live in a city llamada called Sydney.
Nice. In the meantime, amigos, I would highly recommend you to first focus on the first structure we taught you, vivo en plus un or una, depending on the gender of that place, if it's campo or ciudad, pueblo, and then you could add, once you memorize this, llamado or llamada. Vivo en un pueblo llamado, and you add the name, or vivo en una ciudad llamada, and you can add the name afterwards.
That's right. That llamada changes based on the gender of the place you are talking about. Everything changes with genders in Espanol. Okay, now let's add to that description that you can use as a beginner in Spanish by talking about the weather, talking about the climate where you usually live. What is it like? And this adds a bit more flavor so you can impress whoever you're talking to in Espanol as a beginner. So, firstly, we're going to start by using the verb hacer to do this.
Exactly. Entonces, the verb hacer literally in English means to make or to do. So in Spanish, we would say hace and then the description. If we translate hace, literally means it makes. So we would say hace calor. Literally, it's like it makes hot or it makes heat. But we know in English means it's hot. Now we have hace frío. Again, we know means it's cold. So we can say hace calor, it's hot, and hace frío, it's cold. Our first two descriptions we will highly recommend you to learn when it comes to describing weather.
Nice. And you can extend that description if you'd like by using the joining word y, which is just the English letter Y, but it means the word and in Spanish. So, for example, vivo en una ciudad. I live in a city. Y and hace calor. It's hot. That extends your description of where you live.
Exactly. And in our conversation, in nuestra conversación, I used one good question, which is, ¿y allá qué tiempo hace? I ask and there and over there where you live, allá qué tiempo hace? This means, what's the weather like? It's the question form you can use when talking about the weather. Now, tiempo can be a false premise because you might be thinking, okay, this is like time. But when it comes to describing weather, means weather. What's the weather like? Okay. If someone asks you, ¿qué tiempo hace? With hacer means, what's the weather like?
I've definitely been confused by that before. So thank you, Profe Val. Let's give you another couple of examples. So, for example, vivo en el campo. I live in the countryside. Y normalmente hace frío. Now, normalmente is an excellent word if you want to add a bit more spice to your sentence to say normally before you add hace frío or hace calor. So, normalmente hace frío, normalmente hace calor.
These are our key takeaways. In the meantime, let's learn these two powerful sentences and just taught us. Hace frío and hace calor, plus our question form. ¿Qué tiempo hace? Now let's jump to another part in our episode.
Now, let's finally take things further by adding our opinions. How do we feel about the place that we live? Let's start describing it in Spanish, Profe Val.
Exactly. Here, amigos, we need adjective, our beautiful describing words. We use them to describe how is the weather, how is a place, person, object, animal. We can use it to describe so many things. But in the meantime, let's just focus on describing places.
Yes, so let's recap some beginner adjectives that you would have heard in our mini conversation and some extra ones we want to teach you today.
Yes, starting with pretty. Pretty in Spanish can be bonito or bonita, depending on the gender. Let me give you examples. If you want to describe a city, as we mentioned, city is a feminine word in Spanish, ciudad. So I will need to say una ciudad bonita, okay? A pretty city. On the other hand, if I want to describe a town, town is a masculine word in Spanish, pueblo. So I will need to say un pueblo bonito, ciudad bonita versus pueblo bonito. If this part of how the genders work is still a little bit confusing, I will recommend you to head back to episode 7 of the Spanglish Friends. There we explain how the genders work step by step and also how you can make them.
Nice. Let's give some other examples. We have the word ugly. If you need to use this, hopefully you don't to describe where you live, but you could say feo or fair. You could use grande to say your city is big, or pequeño or pequeña to say that it's small.
Nice. Now, if you want to say that your city or your town is old, you could say, or antique as well, could be antiguo or antigua. And now, if it's modern, you can say moderno or moderna.
Yes. A great reminder here of our little trick we have with Spanglish Friends, which is if an adjective ends in O, it goes with the flow. It's going to change its ending based on the gender of the noun, the thing that you're describing. However, if it ends in other stuff, it stays tough. It's not going to change its ending based on the gender of the thing. For example, when we were saying grande, una ciudad grande, a big city, or un pueblo grande, we don't have to change the ending of grande. It is staying tough because it ends in other stuff than an O.
Now, with all these new words, amigos, let's try to put everything we've learned today into one sentence. So if I want to describe a whole city, I could say, vivo en una ciudad llamada Bariloche. Hace frío, es pequeña y es muy bonita. We used
Wow.
everything here. Vivo en una ciudad. I live in a city llamada Bariloche, called Bariloche, which is a city, beautiful city in the Patagonia of Argentina. Hace frío, it's cold. Es pequeña y es muy bonita. It's small and it's very pretty.
Yes. So, in summary, Spanglish Friends, you now know 3 things. You know how to say where you live using that sentence structure of vivo, en, plus un or una, depending on the gender of the place you're describing, then the place. And you learnt how to add llamado to say it's called this, like llamado Sydney. It's called Sydney. Then you learnt how to extend your description of where you live by adding descriptions of climate, of the weather. You can use those simple phrases of hace calor or hace frío. Plus, you can add in that extra little spice with the word normalmente. Normalmente hace frío or normalmente hace calor. Then finally, you learnt how to add your opinions, your descriptions of the city where you live. Now, you learnt some easy adjectives to add in like bonito, grande, pequeña, antigua, and moderna. There are so many options you now have in your arsenal to describe where you live in basic Espanol.
Yay! These, amigos, are exactly the tools you need to participate in our challenge of the week. Para participar en nuestro reto de la semana. Head to the comments right now and tell us, ¿dónde vives? Where do you live? ¿Qué tiempo hace? What's the weather like? And can you try describing the place? Is it bonito? Is it moderna? Is it antiguo?
Yes, start with vivo en and then the world is your oyster. Don't worry if it's a short sentence. That's perfect. It's just cementing in your mind what you've learnt today. And Profe Val is ready to review your answers so you're always improving your Spanish skills.
Absolutamente. And amigos, this is a very handy vocabulary as a beginner because are the most common adjective when describing places. Now you can start describing your city, your town like a pro as a beginner Spanish speak. So post your answers in the comments. We're looking forward to reading them and you might even get a shout out in an upcoming episode.
Woohoo! And to finish us off, a big shout out to our Spanglish friend of the week, who is Jess. And Jess commented on our episode about making weekend plans in Spanish. And her sentence was, Voy a practicar español hoy. I'm going to practice Spanish today, which was a perfect beginner's response. Well done, Jess. Felicitaciones.
Muy buen trabajo, Jess. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much for participating in our reto. Maravilloso trabajo hoy, amigos. Amazing work today, Spanglish friends. We are going to see you soon. And remember, practice makes progress, not perfection.
And a spoiler alert before we go is that next episode, we're going to continue on building on these descriptions of where you live. But this time, we're going to be specifically talking about your home. Do you live in an apartment? Do you live in a house? Do you live alone? Do you live with others? How do you describe all of this in basic Spanish? Stay tuned to find out.
Nos vemos, amigos. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks for listening to Spanglish Friends. We are both so proud of the time you're investing to level up your Spanish skills.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, follow us, leave a rating, or tell a friend about the show. It helps our awesome community grow.
Join fellow beginner Spanish learners by following us on Instagram and TikTok at Spanglish_friends.
Congratulations on taking another step in your Spanish learning journey.
Hasta la próxima, amigos.